sitting here today with Morna-June Morrow, our most recent recipient of the Honourary Lifetime Achievement Award for Handbell Musicians of Canada. I thought I'd ask her a few questions about how she got involved in handbells. So we'll start by asking, how did you get involved with handbells?
Well, I was teaching at Oakenwald School in Fort Garry, and my principal, Elsie Dewar, noticed this article in the Winnipeg Tribune, and in it mentioned about Fred Merritt at Tech-Voc had a set of English handbells. And she said, "Do you know anything about these bells?" And I said, "Oh, I heard them in the festival in March, and I was absolutely intrigued by the sound." She said, "Well, if Fort Garry ordered a set, would you teach them?" And I said, "I'm game to try anything that's new." So an order was put in. They arrived the middle of March 1969 in 2 cardboard boxes. They had neglected to order the cases. So they came, each bell was in a plastic bag, sort of like wine bottles. And I stared at them and I thought, okay, what do I do with them now? So I phoned Fred and he said, "Come over tomorrow," because we had an hour and a half for lunch hour. And I went over to Tech-Voc and he gave me a 40-minute crash course in handbell ringing. That's how I got started.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Awesome. So in June 1972, you decided to attend the American Guild of English Handbell Ringers Conference in Moorhead, Kentucky. What circumstances flew you down that distance?
I had just found out that morning that I had been appointed the music supervisor for Fort Garry School Division. So when I was at the airport, I think I could have flown down to Kentucky without the benefit of a plane.
All right. I know you were instrumental, you and I think Fred Merritt, to bring Donald Allred
Yes.
to Winnipeg to do some workshops. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, of course, I met Don Allred and many other directors in Moorhead, Kentucky. I heard 90 handbell choirs, 2 soloists, and I was mesmerized by the whole thing. So Fred and I arranged to have Don Allred come up April the 10th, 1976, and he did a workshop at Tech-Voc High School with 7 directors from Manitoba. There was Audrey Jones, who was Fred's assistant, Olga Friesen, who had the Stonewall Singing Carillons, Carolyn Buckley had the Transcona group, Norm Giesbrecht was at the Broadway First Baptist, and I had my junior high Fort Garry Carillons and my church group Harmony Bells from Fort Garry United. And so we had a workshop all day and put on a concert that night.
Awesome. And so where all have you used handbells over the 53 years?
5 schools, 5 community groups, 4 churches, 2 ensembles, and I've played about 50 solos since 1993.
Oh my, that's a lot of memorizing.
It is, yeah. Because only the first time I played a solo did I use music. Everything else had to be memorized after that.
Right, yeah, exactly. So what keeps you passionate about the sound of handbells?
I think, well, I've mentioned this before, the vibration of the bell just reverberates my soul, it seems. I love the discipline that's required, and I remember I always talked to my kids when I was teaching them in grade 6, the 3 C's: commitment, concentration, coordination. And I said, the commitment, you've got to commit yourself to be at every rehearsal. I said, it's like a musical jigsaw puzzle, and if a part is missing, the story is incomplete. I've had parents speak to me on parent-teacher nights that their child's concentration had improved since they were playing in bells. They required so much concentration. And of course the coordination with the different techniques. And when I started, there were 4 techniques. Well, you know, there's a lot more now.
Yeah.
And another thing, I find when I see a new piece, I'm always analyzing it, and that analytical mind of mine, I guess, and I'm just intrigued how composers and arrangers can create wonderful arrangements with all the various techniques that you can use now. And the other thing I like is that there are so many pieces. You can take one Christmas carol that everybody knows very well, and you can find it at various levels of difficulty, and you pick the one that suits the ability of your particular group.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
That's good. And I know you've given workshops, lots of places. Where all have you given workshops or adjudicated or?
I've adjudicated in the 3 western provinces, and I've done workshops in 7 provinces, and in Minnesota, and of course in England, the International Handbell Symposium in 2000.
Right. And how did you get involved with that?
Well, it's funny because I retired June 30th, 1998, and I looked forward. The next morning I was going to sleep in, but I was up at 4:30 in the morning driving to Saskatoon for the first Ringing Link conference with Carol Petrie as the chair. Then 2 years later, the Ringing Link was in Edmonton, and I received a call from Janet Wilson in Saskatoon. She said Carol is very ill, and Carol was supposed to direct in Birmingham. And she said, Carol wants to speak to you. And she told me she wanted me to take her place. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I just had no idea. So when I left Edmonton, I went back to Saskatoon. Carol had just gotten out of the hospital. She was at Janet Wilson's house, and she showed me the piece I was to direct, Pat Thompson's Lullaby of the Iroquois. And she told me what to expect at a symposium. And I drove home, and a few days later, Tracy Wright and I drove back to Saskatoon for Carol's funeral. And what was really tough was seeing her kids, the tapestry ringers. They were to ring in Birmingham. So it was obviously a very emotional time for them, for all of us. And I remember when I did direct them, I told the kids, I said, before we play our mass ringing piece with the 800 ringers, I'm going to tap my shoulder with my baton, and that's going to be Carol listening to her kids.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've had some ups and downs in the health department of handbell ringing. Handbells, of course, we all know, are not light instruments, and so you've had some experiences, and even when you were in North Dakota at a workshop, give us a little tidbit of that.
1 rotator cuff, 3 rotator cuffs, 5 abdominal hernia surgeries. So I have a lot of mesh holding my gut inside. But when I drove down to Fargo, I was to work with choir directors from Wisconsin, the 2 Dakotas, and Minnesota. And I took very ill, and I was staying, fortunately, with a former Winnipegger who was a doctor, and his wife I had taught with. And he said, you are going to emergency. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had my 4th abdominal hernia surgery. And the next morning, with tubes sticking out everywhere, some of the handbell ringers came up to the hospital, and would you like to do a workshop in Duluth? So I did that in 2016. I've done a couple of workshops in Duluth, but that one almost didn't happen.
Right, yeah.
But fortunately, the doctor there got it right, and then 2 years later, I had to have another one here.
Yeah.
And apparently old ladies aren't supposed to carry around 500 pounds of equipment all the time.
Apparently not.
No.
No. So as a result, in our quartet, Ring Out, that MJ plays in and houses the bells for, and we practice at her place, we don't let her carry very much. The other 3 of us do most of the lifting, and if we can get a neighbor to help, we're always happy though.
Oh yes, very much so.
So pre-pandemic, we had a community ensemble in Winnipeg,
Yes.
Rochester Ringers, because Morna-June lives on Rochester, and we were using her bells, directed by Dr. Stuart Sladden. And tell us a little bit about that ensemble and how you thought of that and how you got it going.
Well, I had conducted the chapel bells at Westworth United for 25 years, and with the rotator cuff surgeries, I found it very difficult directing for long periods of time. So I asked Stuart if he would form a group, because we were hosting the next National Ringing Link conference here, and so we did, and we were trying to figure out what name to call ourselves, and no, we couldn't come up with a decision. I said, look, I like alliteration. I live in Rochester. Ringer starts with R, Rochester Ringers. So that's how we got the name. But the funniest thing was, that conference was called A Dickens of a Ring, and my mother and I had visited the Charles Dickens Museum in England, and guess where it was located? Rochester, England.
Oh, goodness.
So we have a double meaning for the name, Rochester Ringers.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've all been sort of stifled by the pandemic the last few years, but what groups are you now playing with?
Well, I'm playing with you and our camera lady, Jewel Casselman, and Susan Stevenson, who directs the Broadway First Baptist, so I play in that group. Our quartet, Ring Out, and I'm also playing at St. Andrews River Heights United Church that just started again after a 3-year absence.
Right, yeah.
And I substitute in your group every once in a while.
Every once in a while, I call her into service, yes. Well, this has been a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any special things about handbell ringing?
Well, it's been such an important part of my life, and I think what I treasure more than anything are all the friendships I've made with the people. And you know, it's I remember in England they referred to them not as handbell choirs but handball teams, and I thought, yeah, it's a sport. It's a team sport. Everybody is responsible for their own contribution to the group. And I find that handbell ringers, just last week I was asked to MC for the Good Neighbors, and then you know, you loan people music, you loan them a bell tree or whatever they need, and there's that common, you know, courtesy amongst handbell directors. And I really treasure all those memberships and members and friendships that I've made over the years.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it's been great doing this interview with you, and I hope all of our Handbell Musicians of Canada members enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed doing it, but as much as we enjoy learning from Morna-June in Manitoba and ringing with her. Thanks to our camera person, Jewel Casselman, who was called into service because of her expertise. So thank you very much, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, and I'm very honored to receive this award.
Thanks.
Thank you.